Hey, how's it going? This is Michael Arana of the Arana Nation. I hope you all had a great Christmas and holiday season. I know the new year is coming up, and I hope everyone has a great new year. But look, today we're going to talk about a little bit about this whole United Nations Migration Pact and how the United Nations, throughout the years, have destroyed and have harmed economically and socially many different third world countries throughout the world. You can think of Rwanda, you can think of Haiti, you can think of Somalia. I mean, the United Nations has been a cancer on dark skinned countries and third world nations. And now they're coming into the first world and they're coming to destroy places like Europe and Canada, where I am right now. Now, I made this video because a few days ago I watched that movie Hotel Rwanda. You know that propaganda movie which made the Hutus look like a bunch of killers and thugs, and made the Tutsis look like victims. And oh, woe is me, we're being chopped up with machetes. And then of course you have the white Anglo-Saxon inbreeders trying to say, oh, it was just a bunch of black Africans killing each other. Well, the situation was a lot more complicated than that. I'm going to share this, and there's a lot of similarities between Rwanda and what's happening in Canada. The divisions, the tensions, the United Nations coming in trying to determine what the government should do and who should come into our country and who is Canadian and this and that. Let's start with Rwanda, okay? So Rwanda was run by the Belgians. And when the Belgians ran it, they said that a bunch of people called Tutsis who were not natives of Rwanda. These people come from Egypt. These people come from North Africa. They come from like Somalia and those places, and a lot of them they practice Islam. That's the fact. That's history. They were a small group, the Tutsis. The Belgians said that they are going to, these group of invaders, these group of foreigners, were going to laud over the majority of Hutus in Rwanda. Now, I'm not trying to hate on Tutsis or anything. It's just fact. They were abusive. They were sellouts. They were collaborators with the Belgians. And then when Rwanda became independent, the Hutus got the power back. They got their country back. It's their country. They got it back. And honestly, when Rwanda was independent, before the genocide and before the United Nations, before all of that, before the white elite came in, Rwanda was one of the few countries in Africa that was pretty stable. Their tourism industry was thriving. They had a lot of money. They had a lot of economy. Their economy was pretty good. They weren't first world. They weren't Switzerland, but they were pretty good. They were like a decent Caribbean country, let's say. They were like Trinidad. They were good. People went there from Europe to go on holiday. People went to go buy stuff. The economy was good. Rwanda was doing good. Yes, it was run by a tyrant, but you have to remember that many of these people were upset with the fact that, you know, they were run by people who were not really from Rwanda, and they were abusive and everything. So they said, we have to be tough. We have to be strong. And so then the United Nations now comes in and disrupts everything, disrupts the tourism industry, disrupts the economy, disrupts the way of life, and says, you know, I don't like the way you're treating these Tutsis here. These Tutsis, these same Tutsis who they don't have a history in Rwanda. These guys who, you know, sold out to the Islamists, and many of them practice Islam. When the Arabs came to Africa and tried to colonize Africa, meanwhile, you know, all this other stuff, I don't like the way you're doing this. So we're going to order you to try and take away some of your power and force you to give more power to them. And many Hutus said, no, hell no, this is our nation here. They abused us. We don't know, who are they? I don't know them. What you coming? And then now you got this United Nations, this group, you're coming here, disrupting everything, telling us what to do? Hell no. And many of them rose up and said, no, now I don't condone violence, I don't condone genocide, I don't condone any of that. But, you know, when you rile people up and you get people to a point, they get to a point where it's like, you know, they're going to do anything. Same thing that's happening here in Canada now. You got country which I mean is a first world country and all this other stuff. I mean, you got three founding groups: the natives, the white man, and the black man. Now I know some old white people be like, "Oh, what you talk about, black man?" First of all, I gotta say this. Iran Nation does not welcome uh, ethno nationalism or all white nationalism or that stuff. That's not what the Iran Nation about. And I'm actually trying to weed those kind of people out. I know a lot of people. I know a lot of kid touchers, little rapists are trying to come here and try to say, oh well, Iran Nation. I like him because he's for the white man. I agree it's okay to be white and all that stuff, but I'm for everybody and I speak facts. I don't support one race or another. But it's a fact that with slavery, there was slavery in Canada, and if you look up people like Olivier Lejeune and Marie Joseph Angelique, they were one of the first slaves to come from Africa to Canada. And as far as I'm concerned, any black person born in Canada or who comes here legally is just as Canadian as any white person or any native. And it's true for anybody, but especially if your ancestors were brought to a country against their will and they had no other choice and they were forced to do all kind of crap for somebody, well, then that's just where the dice falls now. But let's get back to the United Nations now. You have a country, Canada, which is established. It has its own laws. It has its own charter. It has its people. It has its history. And you got the United Nations coming in and saying, we want to determine who comes into your country, who doesn't, who calls himself or herself a Canadian, who doesn't, and who becomes a refugee and who doesn't, because we feel that these countries are not doing enough, so we want to decide. We're coming in now, and we're going to decide. Just like they did in Rwanda, they're going to come here and try to determine our future and determine our people and try and take over our stuff. And you see, every time you see those blue helmets and white trucks, trouble is coming. And soon, just like you see blue helmets and white United Nations trucks in Africa and the Caribbean, you see that on the news all the time, and you see nothing improves, it only gets worse, you may start seeing white trucks and blue helmets in your neighborhood. You might start seeing them in Toronto. You're going to start seeing them in Ottawa. You're going to start seeing them in Montreal. You're going to start seeing them in Calgary. You're going to start seeing them in Edmonton. You're going to start seeing them in Vancouver. You're going to start seeing them in Surrey. You're going to start seeing them in Halifax. You're going to start seeing them in St. John's, Newfoundland. You're going to start seeing them in Charlottetown, because the United Nations is now here to determine who comes into our country and who doesn't, and who's a Canadian and who's not, and who's being mistreated and who's not. And there ain't nothing we can do about it, because our establishment and the elites in our country always do what the United Nations tells it to do. It's been like that forever. They didn't want to invade Iraq because the United Nations said no. And by the way, I was against the invasion of Iraq, but it's just another example. They don't want to do anything because the United Nations says so. Canada is a vassal state to the United Nations, and it's just gotten worse. You see other countries, they're not putting up with this. You see Belgium saying, we're going to get rid of their prime minister because he signed that United Nations migration compact. You see it, but we just put up. But there are people out there in Canada who are protesting this and who are saying we want control of our borders and saying that we are Canadians, the United Nations. We don't want to be a vassal state, and there are people, and I salute those people. I salute them with everything I've got. Because I don't want to be a vassal state to the United Nations either. And Iran Nation, even if it has to go to war with the United Nations and the elites and the government of Canada, then so be it. But we're going to fight this with every breath, until the last blood is spilled. We're going to fight the United Nations. We don't want to be Rwanda, where now they're run by the minority. They're run by a tyrant who puts the minority the small group of people who never had a history in Rwanda, the Tutsis. He puts them over the Hutus. The Hutus are being oppressed. They're 86% of the population. They're being oppressed. The Rwanda is now very poor. The tourism industry is going down. Everything is going down. The same thing because the United Nations. And that's one of the problems that African countries did, is they put too much faith in the United Nations. That's one of the problems that Africa has and these third world countries have, and what Canada is doing right now, following in the same third world footsteps of going with the UN. Well, I don't want it. Fight with me. This is the Rwanda Nation.